Some directors are easy to work with. Actors rarely have a bad word to say about Ron Howard or Steven Spielberg. And while some of the original Star Wars crew claimed that George Lucas's direction was limited, no one accused him of running a hostile or abusive set. This video is not about those directors. I want to examine directors known for being extremely exacting, if not outright cruel. I'm not talking about a bit of yelling or frustration. I mean slapping a real priest to get a genuine look of surprise, or firing a gun on set to keep people on edge, or trying to genuinely break them down. Some had conflicts with a single actor, some with many, but where there's smoke, there was often fire. Sam Peckinpah is an interesting case when compared to everyone else on this list, so I figured that he should come first. See, with every other director, sound and fury seem to be personality traits. Their dickishness is inborn, but that's not necessarily the case for Bloody Sam. His explosive personality can almost certainly be traced to his drug abuse and alcoholism, which exacerbated his mood swings and combative personality. Peckinpah was an excellent director, known for his gritty style and his depictions of violence in movies like The Wild Bunch and Straw Dogs. He wasn't afraid to show the brutal side of humanity, something that critics were slow to warm up to. Alas, his lifestyle choices cut his life short, and he could be a pain to work with. His 1965 classic, Major Dundee, was emblematic of this, and he would even call it, quote, one of the most painful things that ever happened in my life, end quote. Peckinpah was often drunk on set, and he clashed with his lead, Charlton Heston. In one instance, Heston threatened the director with a saber when his train of abuses against the cast got to be too much. In another, Heston charged Peckinpah on horseback. The crew fared no better. Peckinpah would fire more than a dozen of them, often on a whim. Things got so bad that Columbia Pictures, thinking that he wouldn't last the entire shoot, decided to shorten the shooting schedule. They almost did remove him at one point, but Heston saved him by offering up his entire salary to keep Peckinpah on, a decision that he would later regret. 1973's Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid doesn't necessarily include battles with his actors, but rather with the studio, MGM. They refused to give Peckinpah the time and money that he needed to make the film, probably thanks to earlier issues, which meant that he couldn't get the shots or even the scenes that he needed. Technical difficulties, such as working with amateur crews and problematic cameras, meant delays, which meant rising costs. In the movie, he cast Chris Christopherson and Bob Dylan. One day, the trio were watching dailies and Peckinpah hated what he saw. So he did what anyone would do. He started pissing on the screen. He also decided to poke MGM back home, taking out a full-page ad in The Hollywood Reporter with, quote, a photograph of himself on a stretcher carried by the cast and crew, a bottle of Johnny Walker being fed intravenously into his arm, alongside a lengthy caption addressing the rumors and admitting there have been some mornings, end quote. The clashes with the studios probably happened more than with the actors. While most actors said that working with him was intense, they did often praise him for his vision. Even studios, despite his train of abuses, were willing to work with him up until his passing in 1984. William Friedkin was one of the all-time great directors. In just a few years, he directed The French Connection, The Exorcist, and Sorcerer, three of the finest films ever made. The French Connection won him Best Director and features one of cinema's most iconic car chases. The Exorcist was genuinely terrifying, and Sorcerer is harrowing. He was praised for drawing raw, visceral performances from his actors, and those three films exemplify that. But he was also extremely confrontational. Now, directors do need to be firm. If you can't defend your vision, you're going to be steamrolled by your cast, crew, and the studio. But Friedkin developed a reputation for volatility and for putting his cast and crew in harm's way. Ellen Burstyn and Linda Blair, both injured on The Exorcist, are prime examples. Both suffered long-lasting back injuries thanks to Friedkin's indifference. Burstyn's came when her character Chris is thrown backward by Reagan. She hits the ground and screams. Those were real screams. The harnesses that were pulling her pulled too hard, and there was no padding either on her or on the floor. She warned Friedkin, but he had ignored her. When he called action, she was yanked violently, fracturing her tailbone and sustaining a permanent spinal injury that left her on crutches for the rest of the shoot. Meanwhile, 13-year-old Blair was strapped to a bed rigged to shake violently during a possession scene. But she was strapped improperly. In one take, the bed shook so hard it fractured her spine and caused scoliosis, leading to chronic back pain. As Blair recalled, quote, I had a lot of difficulty living with the aftermath of The Exorcist. The back injury was far more serious than I ever imagined and really affected my health negatively for a long time, end quote. This was all amplified on account of them being on a freezing set, literally. That's why we can often see the actor's breath on the movie. Everyone wanted to finish quickly, but during an important scene towards the end of the movie, a real priest, William O'Malley, kept flubbing his lines. In Friedkin's words, quote, I took him by the shoulders and I asked him if he loved me and if he trusted me, and he said, "You know I do, Bill." And I told the cameras to get ready, and I hit him as hard as I could across the face. I said, "Roll it." And he went right into the scene. The shock of it brought forth the tears, and afterwards he embraced me and thanked me, end quote. Another tactic that Friedkin used to shock actors was firing a gun on set. It worked, but understandably infuriated the cast and crew. When he did it to Jason Miller, who played Father Karras, Miller nearly quit the film. Now, that's all pretty bad, but then there's Sorcerer. This was Friedkin's attempt to outdo Apocalypse Now, which was filming at the time. The film, a remake of the French classic The Wages of Fear, is excellent and harrowing, but its production was plagued with problems. This wasn't just one actor hating the director. It's safe to say that the entire crew ended up detesting him. Problems began early, driven by Friedkin's perfectionism and his inflated ego following The Exorcist. The film was a boondoggle. Its $2.5 million budget ballooned to 10 times that amount, only to be crushed by the behemoth Star Wars during its release in 1977. Some of the cost escalation came from Friedkin's firing spree. When things didn't meet his standards, he axed people, including his line producer, 5 production managers, his cinematographer, who took the camera crew with him, and the head of the Teamsters, who also took the rest of the Teamsters. On top of that came the injuries: gangrene, malaria, and food poisoning when they were filming in the Dominican Republic. Nearly half the crew was hospitalized and sent home. Friedkin himself lost 50 pounds and contracted malaria. A big chunk of the budget went to the film's bridge crossing sequence in the Dominican Republic. Friedkin called it the most important scene: 2 trucks crossing a rickety suspension bridge. Building the bridge took 3 months and cost $1 million. But a drought left the riverbed dry, so the entire structure had to be completely relocated. The only suitable river was in Mexico, which was a completely different country. They rebuilt the bridge there, and then it happened again. A drought struck, and water levels dropped. So they had to engineer a solution: artificial rain, water pumps, and months of setup. The sequence ended up costing $3 million, nearly 14% of the film's budget. The fallout permanently altered Friedkin's reputation. Though respected as a visionary, many actors were hesitant to work with him. Over time, he mellowed and became more reflective in interviews, but his legacy as a volatile director remains a defining feature of his public life. Alfred Hitchcock is one of cinema's most influential directors. Known as the master of suspense, his filmography includes Psycho, Notorious, Vertigo, Rear Window, Rope, and Foreign Correspondent. For a filmmaking masterclass, look no further than Hitchcock Truffaut, a book-length interview with Francois Truffaut that showcases Hitchcock at his most candid. Is probably the most extensive set of interviews that he ever gave. He was praised for his technical brilliance and helped shape the modern thriller genre. He was also arguably the first director to become a household name. But behind the camera, Hitchcock was cold, controlling, and occasionally cruel, especially towards his actresses. After all, this is the guy that said actors should be treated like cattle. Tippi Hedren is perhaps the clearest example. She accused him of sexual harassment, obsessive behavior, and career sabotage. He had cast her in The Birds under a 7-year contract. Though initially grateful, she soon realized the cost. Her schedule was brutal: 7 days a week for 6 months, with only 1 afternoon off per week. The worst came during a scene where her character is attacked in an attic. Hitchcock promised fake birds. That was a lie. For a week, trainers hurled fake and live birds at her. In her words, quote, "There was a cage with 4 boxes of ravens, gulls, and a few pigeons thrown in. Bird trainers with gauntlets up to their shoulders hurled birds one after the other at me for 1 week. As days went by, it just became worse and worse," end quote. One bird gouged her cheek and another nearly pecked out her eyes. She, for good reason, broke down in exhaustion. She suffered this for a week and would later say, quote, "It was a nightmare. I ended up in a doctor's care for a week." Hitchcock said, "She can't rest for a week. We have nobody else to film." The doctor said, "What are you trying to do? Kill her?" I didn't hear Hitchcock's answer, end quote. All of that was layered with sexual harassment, Hedren said. Despite her negative experience, though, the 7-year contract meant that without his permission, she couldn't do another film. They worked again on Marnie in 1964, which was their last collaboration. Hitchcock continued to make advances on her, and she kept rebuffing him. When she tried to get out of her contract, Hitchcock refused to release her. Every time he tried to work with her again, though, she refused until, in 1966, he finally sold her contract to Universal. Hedren likely had it the worst, though others would complain about his icy direction. He was the prototypical dictatorial director. He knew exactly what he wanted, and wanted only that. When working on Vertigo, Kim Novak recalled that he told her, quote, "I hired you, and that's who I want, what you bring to this role. But what I do expect from you is to stand where I want you to, wear what I want you to, and speak in the rhythm that I want you to." and he worked a long time with me to try to get the right rhythm, end quote. Of Vera Miles, who he initially wanted in Vertigo, he said, quote, I was offering her a big part and the chance to become a beautiful, sophisticated blonde, a real actress. We'd have spent a heap of dollars on it, and she has the bad taste to get pregnant. I hate pregnant women because then they have children, end quote. While his treatment of actors came under fire in his own day and in recent years, most still went on to praise his skill. Otto Preminger was a towering figure of Hollywood and one of the most influential directors during the middle of the 20th century. He was something like Kubrick before Kubrick, a wicked perfectionist, though perhaps more explosive in his temperament than the seemingly unflappable Kubrick. It's not for nothing that he got nicknames like Otto the Ogre and Otto the Terrible. He made his name directing movies like Anatomy of a Murder, Laura, and Exodus, the last of which he helped break the Hollywood blacklist with. Preminger had no love for censorship and would try to push taboos and morally complex protagonists, doing his part in battling the Hays Code. Behind the scenes, he was something of a dictator. Part of that meant that studios liked him. He could be counted on to bring a movie in on time and on budget. The other part meant that actors and crews sometimes really did not like their experience with him. Sometimes that was apparent even before filming started. For example, Lana Turner was originally cast as the female lead in Anatomy of a Murder, but just a month before filming was set to begin, she left the project, citing his domineering personality. Preminger also made a guest appearance on the Adam West Batman show as Mr. Freeze. In Back to the Batcave, West's memoir about the show, he said that Preminger tried to co-opt episode director George Wagner's duties and was, quote, meddling where he wasn't wanted, end quote. West also called him out for going limp when West was trying to pick him up for a scene, which made it harder for West to pick him up. Legendary actor Laurence Olivier, meanwhile, called him a bully when they were shooting 1965's Bunny Lake is Missing. Two actresses stand out though. The first is, while filming Forever Alone, Preminger was continuously apoplectic at actress Linda Darnell. This is probably because he didn't want her as the lead in the 17th century romance drama. Nathaniel Rich, writing for AFR, said that during filming, Preminger, quote, yelled at Linda Darnell almost daily for 2 months until the actress collapsed on the set and was ordered by a doctor to take 10 days off to convalesce, end quote. Darnell would soon come to detest him. Jean Seberg, who Preminger had discovered, suffered some of the worst treatment. She was in her teens when she was cast as Joan of Arc in 1957's St. Joan, wherein she got castigated. In her words, quote, I have 2 memories of St. Joan. The first was being burned at the stake in the picture, the second was being burned at the stake by the critics. The latter hurt more, end quote. Of her experience with Preminger, she said, quote, with him, I became a nervous wreck, crying and jumping when the phone started ringing, incapable of walking calmly across a room, end quote. His treatment of her is unique in how it's corroborated by others in a way that's not the case with the other directors on this list. Jack Arnold, who directed Seberg in The Mouse That Roared, said that Seberg was, quote, fresh from her indoctrination by director Otto Preminger into film acting. Preminger was a screamer and a yeller. He waited until he got her into hysterics, then he turned the camera on. I don't yell and scream, and this was a new experience for her, end quote. Meanwhile, Mylène Dimonjo, an actress who worked with both Preminger and Seberg on Bonjour Tristesse, said that, quote, Jean was scared of him, so he would take advantage and eventually became very mean to her, end quote. His meanness towards her was seemingly singular and over the top. David O. Russell is one of the directors that started to come up in the 90s alongside Quentin Tarantino, Kevin Smith, David Fincher, and Robert Rodriguez. They made their bones by going their own way and helping define the independent cinema movement. David Fincher was known for being a perfectionist and demanding dozens of takes to get the performance that he wanted. Kevin Smith was known for being chill, perhaps almost detrimentally so. David O. Russell was known for being incisive, but also something of a dick. This is the guy that put Christopher Nolan in a headlock in public because he wanted Nolan to release Jude Law for I Heart Huckabees, even though Law had left the project to appear in The Prestige. Russell said, quote, his fellow directors show artistic solidarity and give up his star in order to save Huckabees, end quote. The $20 million movie made $20.1 million at the box office and had a terrible production. Russell had a chaotic, hostile personality, which seemed to have mellowed somewhat for a while, but as of late has apparently not abated. There are plenty of stories about his temper, verbal abuse, and mood swings, which have led to physical altercations with cast and crew. One example was his conflict with Lily Tomlin on I Heart Huckabees. Video showed Russell throwing stuff off a desk, kicking a prop, yelling obscenities at Tomlin, leaving, coming back, and continuing yelling as someone cleared the set. All this because he thought that Tomlin wasn't saying her lines right. It is worth noting, however, that years after the incident, Tomlin said, quote, I adore David. I adore him as a talent. A lot of my friends said, well, you won't work with him again. I said, of course I would. I adore him. I love him. He's brilliant, end quote. While she might have detested working with him in the moment, she, like many actors, would eventually move on, chalking it up to passions. Things were a bit different with George Clooney, who starred in Three Kings and had what might still be the most notable feud between an actor and a director in Hollywood. Russell didn't want Clooney in the first place because he thought that he was a TV actor, while Clooney detested how Russell treated the cast and crew. One day, Clooney thought that he saw Russell throw an extra to the ground. Clooney came to the extra's defense and got into an argument with Russell, which devolved into an actual fistfight. It was a long time coming and more of a culmination of events than an in-the-spur-of-the-moment kind of thing. In Clooney's words, quote, "We started pushing against each other with our heads. So I got him by the throat, and I was yelling at him and he was screaming at me and we were at it," end quote. While they eventually made peace, Clooney has said he doesn't want to work with someone like Russell ever again. Then, while working on American Hustle, he reportedly made Amy Adams' life a living hell. When asked if he made her cry on set by GQ, Adams said, quote, "He did. He was hard on me. That's for sure. It was a lot," end quote. And that, quote, "I was really just devastated on set," end quote. And journalist Jonathan Alter, in an email to Michael Linton, the CEO and chairman of Sony at the time, wrote that, quote, "Not only are these stories about him reforming himself total BS, but the news stories of his abuse and lunatic behavior are extreme even by Hollywood standards," end quote. He continued, quote, "He grabbed one guy by the collar, cursed out people repeatedly in front of others, and so abused Amy Adams that Christian Bale got in his face and told him to stop acting like an asshole. He treated his crew like shit, demanded his own bathroom at all times, and frightened people, as he famously had on Three Kings," end quote. Most recently, an actor and crew walked off and subsequently quit working on Madden, a biopic Russell is working on about John Madden. Things came to a head after Russell's use of a racial slur. Before that, one article said that, quote, "The same actor reportedly said he did not want to be in a locker room scene that required full frontal nudity, which allegedly angered Russell," end quote. That said, it's worth noting that the studio contests this, saying that the inclusion of the word was the actor's idea, that Russell did not use the word on set, and that the nudity scene wasn't a surprise, but something that everyone knew would be happening. Despite all of this, Russell has had a resilient career. He often does seem to make up with his actors and actresses, and while some of them do refuse to return, many of them do, such as Christian Bale and Jennifer Lawrence. What comes of his recent controversy on Madden remains to be seen. Roman Polanski is famous for two things. One is his directing career. Movies like Rosemary's Baby and Chinatown are still critically acclaimed, and the latter is one of the finest movies ever made. But the second thing, and the one that's eclipsed his career for decades, is the fact that he's a rapist who fled from the law and has remained free in France ever since. But beyond the criminal case, Polanski had long been described by actors and collaborators as manipulative, dictatorial, and cold. Polanski was in a dark place when making Chinatown. After all, his wife, Sharon Tate, had been brutally murdered just a half-decade prior, and he brought that darkness to set. About the one person that he had an okay relationship with was producer Bob Evans, who wasn't even there every day, and it could be over the smallest thing. For example, in her memoir, Faye Dunaway recounted that Polanski was annoyed that a single strand of hair, literally a single strand, was out of place during a shot. Polanski pulled it out, which seems like a small thing, but that was more of a straw that broke the camel's back situation. In her words, quote, "It was not the hair, it was the incessant cruelty that I felt, the constant sarcasm, the never-ending need to humiliate me," end quote. She continued that, quote, "It was a sadistic act. It came at the end of a very long litany of things that Roman had done, mentally and emotionally to me," end quote. It got so bad that Polanski refused to let her use the bathroom at one point. So, Dunaway pissed in a jar and threw it at Polanski, who was, to put it mildly, upset. Meanwhile, Jack Nicholson was a fan of the Lakers and would go back to his trailer to watch a game between takes. This annoyed Polanski, who blamed Nicholson for not being able to get a shot that they needed. In order to solve the situation, he literally broke Nicholson's TV with a baseball bat. The latter, understandably, left set. It is interesting to consider that despite the production being as difficult as it was, the final movie was pretty good. On Rosemary's Baby, Polanski would direct John Cassavetes, a pioneer of the independent film movement in the United States. It is to the Academy's discredit that Cassavetes, who was nominated on separate occasions for Best Supporting Actor, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Director, never won any of those awards, but that's for another video. According to Mia Farrow, who plays Rosemary in the movie, Polanski would often get as many as 30 or 40 takes. This annoyed Cassavetes, who preferred more raw, more improvised scenes. Cassavetes thought that Polanski was basically killing the magic that made acting an art form. Farrow noted that these weren't just private apprehensions from Cassavetes, but open, public dispute that led to them growing apart over the course of the movie. Eventually, it turned personal. According to Farrow, Polanski was one day talking about how it's impossible to expect men to be faithful to any one woman. Cassavetes countered that, quote, "Roman knew nothing about women or relationships, and that he, John, was more attracted than ever to his wife, Jenna Rollins. Roman stared at him and blinked a few times and for once had no reply, end quote. They finished their collaboration and would never work together again. It is worth noting that many of these directors are considered to be some of the best to ever do it. Each of them have directed at least one classic, oftentimes several, though the question remains, did they have to be as mean as they were to get the right performance from their actors? A director needs to be confident and forceful in the direction, yes, but they always seem to take it further than they should have. We got a lot of great movies out of it, sure, but in many cases it came at a great interpersonal cost for the actors and the crew.